Hi there, my name is Matt Luard. I'm an indie game developer and this is an exclusive screencast for Game Dev Tuts where we are going to be making a basic game in about half an hour. You might have come across the very popular flash game Canabalt, in which the player has to carefully time jumps correctly between unpredictable platforms and generally try to avoid dying a horrible death. It's good fun, and I think as a game developer there's quite a lot to be learned from trying to implement a very similar game. So what I'm going to be doing in this video is creating a Canabalt clone in Multimedia Fusion 2. If you use a construct, which is a very similar tool, you'll be able to follow along as well, and indeed many of the details of the implementation are going to be applicable whatever tool or programming language you use. So don't worry. Also, if you are a complete beginner to game development, you can right now go and download the demo of Multimedia Fusion 2 and just follow along, and in half an hour you will have finished your very first game, so that's exciting. Let's get started, shall we? Right, I'm going to go ahead and create a new game here. Now immediately we've got to make some important decisions about the game that we're creating. For example, or firstly, the resolution of the game. What kind of screen size are we going to have? I'm going to go for a bit of a widescreen resolution here of 800 by 380. And what I'll do, I'll show you why I've chosen that particular resolution. It's because a wider screen is going to be very helpful for the player, because their eyes are not going to be over here. It's going to be as far right as they can get as they are looking for the next platform that is coming in that they're going to jump to and ideally try not to die. Now the wider you make the screen, the easier it is for the player, and the less wide you make the screen, it can get to a point where the player just feels frustrated because they can't jump in time because they don't have enough warning. And so I find that a screen size of 800 is going to suit the game just fine. I've noticed haven't changed the name yet of the game. I'm going to go ahead up here and rename the game to Turbulent Tundra. You'll see why I have named that like that a bit later on. I think we also don't need a menu bar, so I'm going to turn off that bar on the top, and I'm not a big fan personally of the thick frame, so I'm going to turn that off as well. And if we run it, there we go. It looks quite good. I think it looks much more like a game window. I feel that the Canabalt original game had quite, because it was widescreen as well, it had quite a cinematic kind of feel, quite a dramatic feel, and so that can only be helpful. I'm going to go into our frame here and start creating some objects in this world here. So I'm going to go and create an active object, and this is going to be the player. So I'm going to go in, I'm just going to fill it with a solid colour, and I feel that 32 by 32 pixels, that's a big box shaped for the collision mask that we have here. So I'm going to bring it down to 24 pixels wide. Oh, that looks good. So I'm also going to position it down here on the left where the player is going to be, and I'm also going to rename it to player. Good. I think another object is in order, another active object, and this is going to be the platform. I'm going to come in again and I'm going to fill it with another flat colour, nice exciting grey. Lovely. I'm going to rename that to platform. That's good. Position it here. I like to keep things ordered with names, because what can happen so very easily is you get a lot of objects in here and it's easy to lose track of them or when things get crazy. Things are okay now, but who knows. So I'm going to add a movement to the player. It's really easy to do in Multimedia Fusion 2. Just going to add a platform movement, and you get a lot of properties down here. Now what I'm actually going to do, this might surprise you, I'm going to turn off all the speed and acceleration, which is the run-in speed, the X velocity. I'm just going to set these all as 0, and again, a little bit later, give me a minute and I'll explain exactly why I'm doing that. It might be quite surprising, but for the jump, the jumping is incredibly important in this game. The game is all about jumping, so you've got to get this movement aspect, this game mechanic, as good as we can. So I'm going to bring the strength up a little bit to 75. A good question you might have, it says control button 1 here. What exactly is button 1? Well, we've got to go to the application properties over here to change them. edit the default controls on the keyboard, and I'm going to choose button 1. This is going to be the jump button. So what button do we want? I'm going to go for spacebar. I sometimes worry that spacebar, certainly on some keyboards, is quite a clattery key. It doesn't necessarily feel nice. It's in the middle of the keyboard. I'm not a big fan of it myself, but what I've noticed is that when people sit down to play a game and they don't read the controls, they don't read the tutorial, because a lot of players don't, one of the very first buttons that they will press is spacebar, because it's big and familiar. So that's my game design choice for that. So I'm going to hit OK twice. And if I run it, you'll notice, the player just falls straight through the platform. That's because we haven't set any collision detection events, any of that in there. So I'm going to go into the event editor, and I'm going to create our first condition. That is when the player collides with another object, the platform, then we want to stop the player's movement. There we go. And if we run the application now, wonderful. And if I press spacebar, yes, he jumps. But now that I'm looking at this jumping mechanic, I'm not really too satisfied, because when I press space, the player just jumps to this height. When I press space and I hold it down, doesn't matter. The player just jumps to the same height each time, and I want to give the player some greater flexibility, greater control over the height of the jump, because depending on the height of the platform, then you might need a small jump if they're just dropping off to a lower one, but if the platform comes in and it's at a higher position, they need to be able to jump up, and it allowing the player to control the jump height, it just lowers frustration of when they fail, and that is one of the most important aspects of getting this game right. So I'm just going to go ahead and add that ability to change the jump height by just playing with the gravity dependent on the user input. So I'm going to bring in an always condition, and I'm going to always set the gravity of the player's movement to, I'm going to pick quite a high value. I can come back and I can change these values if they're not working, but we'll see. I'm going to pick 70 as the gravity, so it's always at 70 unless, and I'm going to bring in another condition here, the player is holding down the spacebar, in which case I'm going to set the player's movement's gravity to, I'm going to bring it way down, I'm going to bring it to 20. And now I'm just going to test this out, see what it feels like. So I'm just going to tap spacebar. That's quite nice. I like it comes down quite quickly. I like that. But if I hold it, yes. Now that I really quite like that. I'm happy with that. I can come back and change that later if it works out. It's a bit naff, but that will do. Now, next, what I think I want to do is make some decisions about how the scrolling is going to work. Let's talk about that. Now, one naive approach of implementing the scrolling would be to make the level area incredibly wide and have it so that the player is the one who is moving to the right and the platforms remain stationary. But that, you see, indeed that's what you would do if it was a normal platformer, but it would, further down the line, that would bring in some real complexity, because the idea is that the player should be able to play this game for as long as they are able to keep up with the speed of the player. So the level should be infinite in that respect. So what it actually makes much more sense is to apply or give the game the illusion that they are scrolling, and actually it's the player that is remaining at a single X coordinate, and it's the platforms that are moving to the left and being created and destroyed on either side. Now, that is why in the player I set all the speeds and accelerations, which is all the X velocity stuff, to 0, because I had anticipated that. So let's go. I'm just going to go and start implementing that with an always condition. In every single frame of the game, I want to change the X coordinate of each platform object. So I'm going to set the X coordinate to the X coordinate it already has, but then I'm going to take away 1, subtract 1. So every frame it's at an X coordinate that is 1 less than the previous one. And just to test this, I am going to go and create a whole bunch more just duplicating these platforms by holding Control and dragging. Create a whole bunch of them, why not? Just chop off the ones at the end. Whoops, did I do that? There we go. And we can test how that works like that. Now, that's pretty good. It looks like it's scrolling, but one thing you might have noticed is that our player has disappeared. He's been carried off by the platforms, which is not ideal. I'd like the player to be able to see their character. So I'm just going to check what X coordinate I've got on the player. 33. Now I want that the player to stay at that X coordinate. So on this always condition, I'm also going to set the player's X coordinate to 33. There we go. Let's see how that works. There we go. That looks pretty good. It looks like this looks like we're scrolling. We're getting somewhere now. Now, the next thing is we want to start creating these platforms at the correct moment. We don't just want to start creating them on an always condition. We don't want to create one every single frame, because what will happen is we'll just start spitting out really thousands of platforms, and that would not be good for performance reasons. What we actually want to do is we want to create a platform roughly about there, and then as it moves to the left, when it moves about 32 pixels, we want to create another one, and then when those two move 32 pixels to the left, we want to create another one, and so on and so forth. So it's at that moment when 32 pixels have passed that we want to be creating a platform. So we can do that by implementing a bit of exact timing, and for this I'm going to use a global value, and I'm going to create it here and call it ticker. And what I'm going to do, you'll see why I'm doing this. I'm going to every single frame, I'm going to increment, I'm going to add to that value 1. So every second, because we're at 50 frames a second, that variable will increase by 50, and that will be this will give us the information we need to know how long it's been since the last platform was created. Now what you'll see, I want this to be the very last thing that happens, this incrementing, be the very last thing that happens every frame. So what you'll see me do is keep moving this event to the very end of my code. That will help with keeping things precise, and there will be no confusion. So I'm going to start creating some platforms. I'm going to test as to the value of ticker now by comparing two values, and the first one is going to be ticker mod 32, and when that equals 0, that is when we're going to create a platform. If you haven't come across the modulus operator before, what that means is that when what this expression will mean is when ticker is very perfectly divided by 32, that is when and there's no remainder. What this does is it tests for the remainder. When there's no remainder, that is when we want to create our platform. I'm just going to move that above the ticker. I'm going to create an object platform, and I'm going to create it on the right hand side, of course. I'm not going to create it exactly at 800, I'm going to create it at 832, and yeah, we don't need to worry about the height for now, because we're going to add in all these different heights later, so whatever that is fine. Now I'm going to test this out, and yes, that seems to be working quite well. I've got a debugger up here, little window, and I can see from this that roughly every 32, it's not perfect, but roughly every 32 pixels a new object is being created. It's not just it's not just creating thousands of them there. So one thing you might wonder is, hang on, we're creating a bunch of objects here. What's happening to the ones that are going off the screen? Are there going to be any memory concerns to worry about? Well, not in Multimedia Fusion 2. Depending on the tool, you might need to consider what happens to the objects that are going off the screen. It depends what programming language you're using, but for Multimedia Fusion 2, in fact you can see it's happening now. It's stabilized around 68. When a platform gets far enough from the frame, it starts to be destroyed. There's garbage collection involved, so that's really good. Now, what are we going to do next? A bit of organisation. I think I'm going to create a group of events. I'm just going to start grouping these events. One of them called player for the player related code, and another one called platform for the platform related code. There we go, keeping things organised. Good. I think there's a bit of a limitation with this code that we've written though, because our game, what is meant to happen is we want the platforms to come in at slowly increasing speeds to create difficulty for the player, and right now we're not supporting that. So I'm going to create another global value here called run speed. I'm going to give that a value straight away. I'm going to, just before I forget to, I'm going to give that an initial value of 4. That might be fine. And instead of subtracting 1 from the platform's x coordinate every single frame, I'm just going to edit that. I'm going to change that so it subtracts the run speed. If we play that, we can see it doesn't quite work as we expected it to, because well, it just creates them, makes it quite difficult. Yeah, I'm not going to be able to keep doing that. What we need to do is we need to edit this modulus condition here by dividing 32 by the run speed, and that's close enough. I think that will work. Let me just test that. There we go. That looks quite good. Okay, so next we want to have platforms of different lengths and also gaps of different lengths. That's going to be important to support. So I'm going to create 2 more global variables down here called current platform length. That will hold what stage we are in creating the platforms. If we've still got more to create, that will hold the value. And also a second one, current gap length. And that is going to be important because although we won't be creating gaps, because that's the absence of creating these platform elements we have here, it will be keeping track on whether or not we're in the middle, or are we creating a whole platform or are we creating a whole gap. So to begin with, I'm going to just duplicate this ticker mod 32 run speed condition, and every single time this is triggered, I'm going to subtract 1 from the current gap length. So current gap length can actually be less than 0. If it is less than 0, that means we are creating a platform, and if it's greater than 0, we are creating a gap. That's going to be important to remember if the next bit is going to make any sense at all. Now, we only want to create a platform when our current platform length is greater than 0, so I'm going to come in with a global value here and set compare to current platform length. If that's greater than 0, then go ahead, create a platform element. I might as well add in the test for, in fact it's very important that I do, add in the test for the current gap length being lower than 0. Now every single time we create a platform element, we need to decrease current platform length by 1. So I'm going to do that now. Current platform length by 1. Now the issue here is that right now these two values just stay at 0 the whole time. We need to randomize them. So when current platform length is 0 and when the gap length is also 0, this means that not only has a platform been finished, but a gap has also just been finished. So if we had set current gap length to 5 and it's been counting down to 0, that means the gap is finished, so we need to randomize the current platform length. And I'm going to give this a base value of 15, but we want to give this a bit of a random value, so I'm going to add a random 6, which that might work. So at the lowest it can be is 15, and the greatest it can be is 20. Good. Now what about randomizing the gap length? Well, we want to randomize this when the current platform length is 0, so I'm going to drag that down there, but the current gap length, compare it, the current gap length is lower than 0. So at this point we want to set the current gap length to random. It's going to be a bit harder to guess what will be a good gap length, because with platforms they can be quite long and that's fine, but gaps are very important because the players are going to pick that's going to be the main danger of the players falling down there. So I'm going to get random 3 plus random 2. We'll see if that works. Shall we test this out? Let's see how it goes. Now we're in the middle of a platform, counts down, gap. Now we're in a platform, there's a very small gap there. I think we might need to change that up a little, make it so that it's more likely to be a larger gap. Right now, again, we haven't implemented anything about heights, but that's okay, since we're going to do that next. But first of all, I'm not very happy with the platforms, so I am actually going to come back in and tweak this and give it a higher base value of 4 and random 3. Let's see how that works. It's all about perfecting the numbers here. Can I make that jump? Yep, just about. Okay, that's a little bit better. Now for the heights. And it's really easy to add heights, and I think in fact it's pretty much downhill from here on. I'm going to be restricting how the heights can work. It makes it easier if there is just a set number of levels that the platforms can come in at, and I'm going to say that there's going to be 5 of those. They're going to come in at these kind of levels. So down here this will be height number 0, and up here that'll be height number 4. I'm just going to get the y coordinate of this particular platform, 321. I'll try and remember that, but I bet I'll forget. It's alright. Now we need a global value here called height, and originally it's at 1, so I'm going to set that to 1. Now when we start to create a whole new set of platform objects, a whole new platform, that's this event here, number 10, I'm going to be setting the height. So we have a choice here. We could just do random 5 and that would give us a random height between 0 and 4, which is what we want, but we find out very quickly that doesn't work, because that doesn't take into consideration the current height, which is very important, because if the height is currently at 0, for example, way down at the bottom, and then the next platform is at height number 4, there's no way the player can jump that high. So what we're going to do is we're going to set the height to the current value of the height, take 1 away, and then add a random number 3. So the height can now be at either the same height it was before, or the height below it, or the height above it. We find out that will work quite well. But now we need to actually set the platform y coordinate. So every time we create a platform, we're now going to set that at the correct y coordinate, which is 321, was it? I'm trying to remember from earlier. So 321 minus the height times 64, because there was 64, that was the distance between each individual platform height, and that should give us the correct y coordinate. So we can give that a go and see if that works. So there we go. Now it goes down to height 0, and I messed up the jump up, and it seems to be working quite well. It seems to be coming at the right height, but there is a bug that I am anticipating. We haven't seen it yet. What happens when the height is at 0 and our height random generating code gives a height lower, a value lower than 0, or indeed a height greater than 4, the highest one, these boundary points? That's going to be bad, because then what will happen is the platforms will be starting to being created above and below the actual frame. You see, here we go, we just saw it there, and that's no good. So we can easily do a quick test on the height, on what height value has been generated. So I'm going to take a look at what the height is, and if it equals 5, which is 1 more than we want it to be, then we're going to set height. We're not going to set it back down to 4, because then it might do it again. We're actually going to set it to 1 lower than the highest value, 3. So it's actually, when it's at the top level and the bottom height, it's actually more likely to go back down, which should really give us a nice sort of variety in the height, so a greater variety. It won't all be staying the same. We need to do the same thing for what happens when the height is equal to -1, so I've just copied and pasted that that particular event. I'm going to test if it's -1, and if it is, then I'm going to set the height to 1. And we'll find out that that works very well. Let's see how it works. Now I'm looking to see if the gaps are fair and whether anything is given that is unfair to the player and any jumps that can't be reached. Okay, it seems alright so far. I think that's alright, but what you'll notice is that we have yet to actually change this run speed variable. It's still at 4 and it's always indeed at 4. Well, I think we should do something about that. So, I am going to opt for quite a straightforward approach to increasing the run speed, and that is just to do it every 5 seconds. So I'm going to restrict the actions by 5 seconds, and I'm going to insert, because I need this to occur only when we're in the middle of a gap. If I do it in the middle of a platform, then some really weird bugs can occur with how we're doing the modulus function. So I'm going to test if the current gap length is greater than 0, and when this occurs I'm going to add to the run speed, like so. And I'm just going to test that this works by bringing my debugger down and just pausing the game, opening up the global values and keeping an eye on the run speed, although we should be able to see that it does increase in scrolling speed. See, we're on 6 right now, and that increases to 7 as soon as we hit that gap there, and you can tell it's getting faster and it's going to get quite difficult quite quickly, which is good, I think. So now another thing we have yet to implement is death and the player dying and what happens then and how they can restart the game and all that good stuff. So the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to have a global value called death. When it's 0, the player hasn't died. When it's 1, the player has died, and we're going to test for an overlapping between the player and a platform. And I don't mean when the player collides with a platform, but when the player is firmly overlapping the platform, it's embedded in the platform, the player's clearly died at that point. So at that point I'm going to set the global value of death to 1, and to test this I'm going to need to make the platforms much taller, right down to there. Good. Now, when death equals 1, we want to stop the movement. I think we can agree that once you've died, it's very hard to jump. So I'm going to just keep that stopped. But also we don't want the platforms just to keep moving to the left. So I'm going to replace this always with when death is equal to 0, so when the player is still alive. I also don't want to keep creating platforms, so I'm going to drag this down, add an extra condition into our creation of the platforms, that bit of code there. Now we also want to be able to restart the game once the player has died, so when death equals 1, drag that down there to duplicate it, and the player hits enter, we want to restart the current frame. We've also got to reset some of these global values that are no longer in their initial state. So I'm going to set ticker to 0. I'm going to set the run speed back to its initial value of 4. I'm going to set the current platform length back to 0, because we start off with a gap, and that gap length is going to be 6. We also need to change the height back to its current initial value of 1. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, we want to turn off death and set that back to 0. Now I'm going to give this a quick test, run the game. I'm going to embed myself in a wall, and you can see it pauses. There's no more platforms being created, the platforms aren't going left, and if I hit enter it resets, and that's very nice. Seems to work quite well. A final thing I think that we have yet to implement is a scoring system. So I'm going to just bring in a counter, and I'm going to position this at the upper right hand corner, and I'm going to go for a really straightforward approach to the scoring, and that is that when the player is alive, so when death equals 0, move that above the ticker, I'm going to add to this counter the run speed. So the faster the player is going, the more they are rewarded for surviving. And it's similar to how Canabalt does it. Canabalt has, I think, meters, but we still get this really nice. I quite like how the score increases very fast. You end up racking up some really nice high scores. So that all seems to work quite nicely. Great. And that is all of the code complete. All we have now to do is to make the game look a bit prettier. And very luckily I have drawn up some graphics for you, so it's really easy just to plug them in and make the game look a little bit better. And suddenly the name Turbulent Tundra makes a lot more sense. Since our character is going to be a penguin. How nice. So I'm just going to come in here and start replacing some of these block colours with actually some nice graphics. I'm going to bring in this platform tiles thing, and you'll notice that suddenly this is a lot wider. Whereas it was 32, it is now 96, the platform image. But what we'll find out, if we set the hotspot, which is the creation point and the point around which all the animations operate, to 32, it actually still looks really nice. You can see that. Here you get the end of the platform and the beginning of the platform, and you can't really tell the seams. I mean, you can tell there's a bit of repetition there. You can improve that if you're an artist, but I just threw that together. And it does look like this penguin will be jumping from ice floe to ice floe and running for some reason, perhaps from global warming. Maybe this game will have a message, I don't know. We also need to just set the background, give that a nice colour. I'm going to set it a sort of dark blue for the sea in the background, something around there. I'm just picking a bit randomly here. I'm going to bring in a backdrop. That won't move, so it can be a backdrop, and I'm just going to import these back mountains. It's also got some sky in there, and that suddenly makes it look a bit better. We're going from 0 graphics to a game with full graphics very, very quickly. Now for the player, I'm going to have to import all of these frames. So what I'll do is I'll just pause the video and do that myself. It's very straightforward. I'm just going to bring in, for the stopped animation, I'm going to bring in these running frames one by one. So I'll stop the video and just do that, so you don't have to watch me click around for 5 minutes. That won't be very interesting. So I've brought in all the animation frames now. For the walking animation, which I've loaded in on the stopped animation, and that's fine, doesn't really matter. There are 8 different animation frames in the options. I set it to looping, so when the animation gets to the end, I want it just to continue on from the beginning. It will look seamless, so that's fine. And I've taken the speed down to 20 as well. For jumping, the jumping animation, there are 3 different frames. It's not looping, and the speed is even slower at 10. Now the final frame here, I've just actually copied and pasted it into falling, which will make it look okay. And I've also added a new animation at the end, which I've named Dead, and it's just this sad frame for when the penguin collides with an object. In fact, now that I think about it, we haven't set that yet, have we? So I'm just going to go, and when death equals 1, I'm going to go and set the animation, change the animation sequence to dead. And I think it'd be good also to have that game over message in there. So I'm going to bring in another active object, and I'm going to load in the game over image. I'm going to position that somewhere around the middle, which is I think around there, and rename that to game over sign. I'm going to turn visible at start off and only make it visible when death equals 1. So when it is equal to 1, I'm going to make that object reappear. Very good. I'll just test that works okay. So I'm going to see if I can cause my penguin to die so that we can see. You can kind of just about see that the animation frame has changed there, and our game over sign has appeared, so that works okay. Now I think we also need a title screen, don't we? So I'm going to rename this frame to game. I'm going to bring in a new frame, which I'm going to call title. I'm going to move that one to the top, so it's the first one that the game starts with, and I'm going to bring in a backdrop object, and I'm going to replace the image with this screen, title screen here. There we go. Position that there. Now you'll notice that this big click to play button is actually embedded in this image. How do we detect when the player clicks on this image as opposed to any other part of it? Now the easy way to do that is just to bring in an invisible collision mask. So I'll just load in an active object, I'll fill it with some solid colour, position it roughly over the button and scale it out so that it covers our button, the actual button in the image. I'll turn off visible at start, of course I will, otherwise it will look really quite ugly. And I can test with a new condition for a mouse click on an object, and it's going to be a left mouse button, single click on this big collision mask, and I'm just going to move on to the next frame. We'll find out that that works quite well. And so there you have it. That is the final bit of code, bit of graphics that we need to finish this game, and indeed the tutorial. Now please do feel free to continue on and play. First of all, I suggest playing with some of the graphics, or rather some of the values, sorry, that I have set. I've just kind of picked some of these values out of midair. Maybe there are more optimal values, for example with the player jump strength, or how I'm randomizing the current platform length or the gap length. I'm sure there's some much better values that can be found and that make the game more fun, and that's important. I've also thrown in a few just extra graphics in the graphics folder over here. So for example, there's a tree and I think there's a snowman. I think if you're looking for a bit of a challenge and something to implement on your own, have these, a snowman or a tree, randomly generated as part of the platforms. For example, maybe when the player runs into a tree they can die, so that adds a bit of extra complexity. Or when they run into a snowman, their run speed is actually decreased, which makes it easier for the player. All the graphics are yeah, you're free to do whatever you want with them, even for commercial stuff. You're welcome to them. So thank you so much for watching, and maybe I'll see you again soon. Thanks.